This episode is brought to you by The Science of Scaling. And The Science of Scaling is a podcast that, honestly, you should check out.
Yeah, it's called The Science of Scaling, and it's all about how to scale a business successfully, whether it's how to find outside capital or what to look for in your very first sales hire.
It's a new show hosted by Mark Roberge. She's the best-selling author of The Sales Acceleration Formula. He's also a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School and the founding CRO of HubSpot.
One thing that Mark mentions in the show is whether your company is valued at $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, the failure rate is the same, which means we suck at scaling.
In each episode, you'll hear interviews with people like Kyle Parrish, the VP of Sales at Figma, and Kevin Egan, the head of sales at Atlassian.
I've checked out a few episodes of The Science of Scaling, and it's great. Like, for me, I run a company as a bootstrap company. We're not the kind of company that's raised capital, but even still, things like sales, that's super important, and it's the lifeblood of our company. So for me, it's definitely helpful to hear how other people have sort of, who have been there and done it before, how they're actually approaching scaling. So go on in your favorite podcast app, whatever it might be, and search for The Science of Scaling. That's The Science of Scaling. Check it out. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This episode of Rocketship.fm is sponsored by Industry, the Product Conference. This October, gather with hundreds of product managers and product leaders from all around the world for 2 days of keynote talks, challenging working sessions, interactive discussions, social events, and more. Or add a third day and take part in half-day workshops with some of today's top product management facilitators for workshops on leading your teams to innovation, product roadmaps, achieving product market fit, and more. This year's lineup may be the best yet, with keynote speakers including product legend Marty Kagan. He's the author of the book Inspired, which is considered by many to be the seminal book for product managers and product leaders. There's also product positioning expert and author of Obviously Awesome April Dunford, and product leaders from Figma, IDEO, Amplitude, and so many other places. Plus, if you use the code Rocketship, you'll save $100 off your pass. Visit industryconference.com/global for more details. Again, industryconference/global for more information, but pricing increases on the first of the month, so register soon to save.
So as many of you may know, I ventured out this year. I left my job as the chief product officer at Dribbble to start a brand new company, and that company is gigantic. No, really, that's the name. We're actually very small today. But we are the training institute of the future. And my goal is to help you master the new influential disciplines that are driving results within organizations. And we're starting with some absolutely incredible courses like product leadership taught by Ben Foster, the former CPO at Whoop, deconstructing leadership with Allison Go, formerly of Meta and Amazon. We have revolutionizing marketing with AI, which is taught by Marie Osipova, who is the chief marketing officer at Penny.ai, and an upcoming product management course, which is taught by my co-host, Mike Belcito, along with Anna Marie Clifton of Coinbase and Asana, and Victoria Kennedy, who worked at Axios and Huge, and is now running her own venture capital studio. It's not just video courses. We're combining video lectures with take-home assignments and exercises, and then small group mentorship to really help make this information indelible for you and to help level you up, and all at a cost that most companies' learning and development budget covers. So if you're interested, go to gigantic.is, that's gigantic.is, sign up for a course, and you can actually schedule a call with me, and I'll walk you through everything that you need to know. And if you enroll and let me know that you heard about this on Rocketship, I've got a special discount for you. So go to gigantic.is, sign up today, and start your journey upskilling your product, leadership, and marketing skills. I can't wait to see you there.
Welcome to the Rocketship podcast. I'm Michael Sacca.
I'm Joelle Steiniger.
And I'm Matt Goldman.
And we're having 20-minute talks with entrepreneurs teaching you how to launch your product into revenue.
Check out our book at howtobuildarocketship.com to reserve your launch discount and to download a free chapter. This is the talk that convinced us to raise the pricing of Hookfeed. We talk with Brennan Schwartz, co-founder and CTO of Wistia. He talks all about the early days of their company, going from bootstrapping to raising a round eventually, to not making a sale for months after raising a round. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and we were able to relate a ton to it as self-funders. I think you will too.
Welcome to the Rocketship podcast. We're here with Brendan, one of the co-founders of Wistia. Brendan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Psyched to be on here.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you guys got started on Wistia and how the team came together?
Okay, this is an 8-hour story.
Okay.
No, this is well, I think it's worth noting that I started this with one of my best friends from college, Chris, and we set about to do something very different. I mean, which is a common story when starting a business, right? We both kind of knew we wanted to start a business. We weren't exactly sure why, just that it would be kind of like a fun adventure. And I think that was really, at least for me, that was the main reason, like that things could change at any time. And it was this exciting new thing where you were kind of in control. Mm-hmm. And so we had all kinds of like in college, like crazy ideas. They were more like poor get rich quick schemes, I suppose. And it kind of, we started talking about this and we got more serious eventually and like came up with this idea that we thought was like this amazing idea, which turned out not to be so great, at least for us. So our initial idea and the thing that kind of like got me to quit my job, and Chris was doing freelance film stuff at the time for him to turn that off, was to build a competition website for filmmakers where, and a bunch of companies have done this successfully. So it actually is a decent idea, but it just wasn't right for us, where big brands would, host competitions and filmmakers would compete to make like commercial content or stuff for them. Like you've seen maybe that Doritos commercial for the Super Bowl a few years back. That was kind of that model. Mm-hmm. So we thought that would be really cool. And so we like started working on the product, coming up with all these like, designs for it, and then realized like this was just far too ambitious for us. We like barely knew what we were doing. We realized we'd have to sell to big brands. We had no sales experience and no network. We thought we could build a product, but we really had no reason to think that, I suppose, at the time. And we ended up launching instead a portfolio website for artists, and mostly for filmmakers. So this is like around the time that YouTube was getting started, but not a lot of filmmakers were using YouTube. The quality wasn't good. And there was just something about it that people didn't really like. They wanted more control. So we launched this thing. The product was pretty good. We solved a lot of technical challenges. It made it really easy to upload video, and like have it look great on the web, where that wasn't like a really kind of a solved problem at the time in 2006. And we didn't know what marketing was. So we had about maybe like, 60 to 100 people using this, most of which were, friends that we like begged to be on this thing. They all really liked the product, but there wasn't like a real, reason to be on there, I suppose. At this point, it was completely bootstrapped, and we had both worked a year out of college, so we didn't have very much savings. And when we were going about this, like friends and family, were like, "Oh, it's great that you guys are doing a business, but who are you selling to? What is the product? Who's going to buy this thing?" And we're like, "Oh no, this is 2006. Are you kidding? Like, we just need eyeballs on this. Then we'll figure out that later." And they're like, "All right, well, talk to us when you're running out of money." And we were very frugal, and we had made all these financial forecasts of like, how much video viewing there was going to be, how much the servers cost, how much a rent, like every expense that we had. And I think it had us running out of money in like, I don't know, 4 to 6 months or something. Clearly, we did not get far enough along to actually make anything happen in that time. But through, I don't know, sheer force of will, we kind of like scrimped and saved and managed to keep going. But eventually, we just found out the hard way that artists have no money, and it is very hard to get them to pay for anything.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it was, so we had launched that portfolio website for artists, and people were using it, a very small number. who are enjoying it. And we had a friend of ours who we actually work with today was working at a medical device startup, and he had this need to share video between clinical sites and their headquarters. So these surgical videos with sensitive information, kind of like surgical procedures for the patients. And they were sending DVDs around all over the world. So one of the clinical sites was in Chile, and they'd send it to Watertown, Massachusetts, and you can't even overnight a DVD. It would take 2 days to get there. And they were just like, there's got to be a better way. And he's like, you guys know a lot about video. Like, can you please like build a solution to this? Like, I think people would pay for it. And we're like, come on, man. Like, we're for artists. Like, you know that. Like, we're not going to sell out like that. And we were like, just use YouTube. You can make it private. And he's like, no, it's sensitive information. It's like, there's just no way they're going to do that. And so we kind of got to thinking, the thing that like connected in our head that made this like an attractive problem to work on was that because of Chris's experience in film, we knew a lot about what filmmakers needed. And there was a similar problem there where people were FTPing files all over the place. And you'd have the wrong video codec, and your clients like don't know how FTP works. So it's like really hard for them to see the videos. And if you're making a video for someone, you want to present it to them so you can get feedback and adjust it and so forth. And then finally deliver the final product. And so we realized that product was actually is one and the same as what these guys needed to share the surgical videos. And was also something we had been talking about to the users of the portfolio website who really wanted a private way to collaborate on video projects they were working on. So like, we're big product guys, and that was the thing that really clicked for us. We're like, oh, this is a much bigger, like, it wasn't really attractive to build like a one-off, thing for like private medical video sharing. Although I'm sure that would have been, a business unto itself. But we were like, oh, there's like tons of uses of private video sharing. And kind of through that process of building something, taking a long time to build something, very slowly running out of money, very, very close to running out of money, and really loving the process and wanting to work for ourselves and build something. I don't know, that was like a big turning point for us, and also something that we kind of went the complete opposite direction from like, oh, let's just build it and, we just need eyeballs on this, to like, you know what, if we build something really valuable and we get in front of like one person at a time, we can convince them to pay for this, and we can like very slowly build a self-sustaining business. So the pendulum swung the other way.
Cool. You totally sold out. And
we sold out. Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, it's such a, it's a great journey, because it's not what you would expect, that this medical company would need video, and that's how you started this company that's actually very popular in now the tech world, you would say, right?
Oh, what we do now? Yeah. I mean, it's mostly marketers primarily, and it's not private video sharing at all. I mean, so that was another part of the journey that we were like, there's YouTube, and there were, if you remember back then, there were like a ton of fast followers to YouTube. That was a really crowded market, and video was like the hot thing. And we were two guys, in this like house in Cambridge, and all we wanted to do was just survive. Like, we wanted to be in the least competitive market of all time. So we're like, oh, if we're hiding out in this private video sharing niche, like nobody will ever come here. It's like too small of a market. And it's funny that we did that, and we kind of grew slowly. And at some point, people really liked the product, and our customers were begging us they're like, hey, we really want to add this to our website, these videos. And we're like, no. Like, we're private. It's like private video sharing. Like, just use YouTube, use Vimeo. And they're like, no, we really like your interface. You guys have great. We had some of the statistics back then, like the video heat maps. And that was really attractive. And so they basically kind of like forced us into doing that almost against our will. And we were so against it that we caved in for doing it for a few customers, but instead of having something in the product, because we still weren't convinced we should do it, we would email video embed codes to people. So there were like these like artisanally crafted embed codes that a guy here named Ben would like write up and then like put it in a text file and attach it to an email. if you wanted to embed a video on your website. So that's obviously a lot of pain for like a customer really wants to do that. So we're like, all right, there must be a need here. And that nowadays, that's like primarily what we do. A lot of people do private video sharing with us still, but it's mostly for marketers.
I was actually going to ask, with such a big transition from where the product used to be as this portfolio site to the private video sharing to now what Wistia is today, and the public side is, like you said, the biggest part of your business. What kind of time frame are you talking on those kinds of changes?
Oh, that's a great question. So, one other really good thing that happened, I think, from essentially failing, although we didn't, at the time, wouldn't admit that it was a failure when we built that portfolio site, was we were really meticulous about building that product, and like every UI component and whatever we could find, we'd reinvent because we thought there had to be a better way. And when we got to kind of building the first prototype for what is Wistia, which is and this was the private video sharing side, we probably built that like front to back in 2 weeks. It was like really fast, and we really built the bare minimum that we need to get it in the customer's hands and have it be valuable for them and have them pay us. So we launched that with a paying customer. And that was like a really important lesson for us, because we were just, we'd spend forever trying to perfect every little thing only to find that basically nobody used it. So a lot of those changes were really fast for us. So that happened in about 2 weeks, was that we launched the first prototype of Wistia with a paying customer. And then probably, I would say maybe a year later is when we started doing some of the public video sharing stuff. And then we did another rewrite of the product a few months later, now that we had that in there, because it was kind of bolted on, and we wanted to bring it all together so it worked properly.
This episode is supported by the AWS Insiders podcast. AWS Insiders is a fast-paced, entertaining, and insightful look behind the scenes of AWS and cloud computing. Hosts Raul Submaranian and Hillary Doyle dig into the current state and the future of AWS by talking with people and companies that know it best. It's a show that's full of opinions, takeaways, and untold stories about the challenges, innovations, and mind-blowing promise of cloud computing. I checked out AWS Insiders, and look, it is a fantastic show, and it's perfect for anyone in tech who's looking for some of those behind-the-scenes stories, for some reassurance that, things are a little nuts everywhere, and everyone is struggling with a lot of the same problems. The first episode of season 2 is all about filling the cloud talent gap, and it's an interesting discussion on what do we do to help to staff up internally. What are some of the challenges that companies are facing? Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. Thank you to AWS Insiders for their support. This episode is brought to you by Miro. So when I was at Dribbble, over the 6 years, there was one tool that we would always use when we were doing cross-team collaboration. Whenever the collaboration started to get complex, we would bring in Miro. It made it incredibly easy to align stakeholders across regions and time zones, and definitely teams, with ease. And we were able to do all of that while being a completely remote team. It also has integrations into Jira, Azure, Rally, a lot of the tools that you're using already for product management and engineering. So you can import tasks from them as native cards, and it helps you see the big picture. It also helps stakeholders to understand what work needs to be done. It was incredibly valuable. And then they even have an estimation app that gives you a clear understanding of the work scope, lets you identify gaps, and then it has the ability for you to set clear expectations for delivery, especially when you're working across functions. So your first 3 Miro boards are free forever when you sign up today. Go to Miro.com/podcast. That's Miro.com/podcast.
And at that time when you launched, what did your pricing look like?
So that first customer, which was this friend's company, we walked in, I think we made a pricing sheet. I think we probably looked at Basecamp or something like that, because that was like the only SaaS product we knew.
Yeah.
And we like wrote some numbers on a piece of paper. It was probably like $100 a month, 200, 400 with some like really arbitrary stuff in there. And I remember like Chris had it flipped upside down and we like slid it across the table, and they looked at this and like kind of laughed at us, and we're like, all right, we'll just take the most expensive. Like, are you seriously want to sell this to us for $400 a month? Like, because they were used to paying contract. They're like, we'll just pay you like a salary to build this. And we're like, oh, no, this is a product. You have to pay per month. This is how it's going to work. That way we can say no to you when you want certain features. So we completely made it up. We had absolutely no idea. And even, let's see. So once we had that, probably for the first like 3 or 4 months that we were selling the product, the website, if you went to Wistia.com, was just like an H1 tag that said "Hello Wistia" or something like that. There was no place to get a Wistia account or anything like that. So we went like almost too far in the direction of like fully manual, like offline sales, just because we felt like we had more control that way and we could really figure out what people wanted. So
how were you finding people to sell to offline? I mean, were you just cold calling, cold emailing? What did that look like?
Well, at this point we had a little bit of a network. It was still pretty minuscule, but so we had this medical device company. And there was another kind of like a friend of ours who ran a production company in Providence, who was our second customer, who used it for reviews and approvals. And so, we went down there dressed up probably in a suit and tie, I don't know, and, knocked on his door and we're like, gave him a demo of this product and forced him to sign up. And, we did do some cold calling. I would say that wasn't very fruitful for us. Although I think there's one person who Chris called. After we got that video production company using it, we're like, all right, here's a target market. We can, try to find people who want to do this. And there's somebody he called. There's a complete cold call who's now like been a customer for 6 years, I suppose, at this point.
Wow.
He's like, pretty good friends, which is pretty amazing. But the cold calling we tried, it did not work very well for us. So it was kind of like a slow, like finding customers where we could. Another customer that was really early was, it was at like a startup conference type thing. And we were talking to people. Another guy that we were working with, found this guy and he was chatting with him about what we do. And he's like, oh, that's really interesting. Just thinking this guy had another startup, but he actually just was really interested in startups. And he worked at a very big, like telecom company in their training department. And he's like, oh, this would be perfect for video training. And he was just like really interested in helping us out. And they became an early customer as well. So it was just kind of like where we could find people. And a lot of it was very serendipitous.
So how did you guys then transition from these kind of one-off sales into the direction you're going today, which is primarily to marketers and actually publicly using the product?
Yeah, it was a slow transition that took place over many, many years. I mean, so even now you can sign up for free. And so again, kind of in the same theme, like from going like the opposite approach, I'd suppose, that like most companies take nowadays, is you couldn't even sign up online. There wasn't even a phone number. Then eventually there's a phone number, or we'd sell to you in person. When we launched a free plan that people can sign up for, we did that, I want to say like two summers ago, which is pretty recent in our history, really. And so what happened is eventually we had a website. I don't think anyone would ever go to it because there was no way for anyone to find it, really. And we didn't even have a trial for a long time. So there was no way to sign up. Maybe there was a contact form, I think, and I'm sure no one filled it out. Eventually we built a way to like provision accounts automatically. So sign up for a trial account. And when we did that, we were like, oh, cool. Like now maybe we could get somebody to sign up for this. And we had enough stuff on the website that kind of like pitched the value of the product. And we signed up for AdWords, Google AdWords, put a few things in for private video sharing. And one of the first trials that we got was Cirque du Soleil. And we were like, what the heck is this? Like, wow, this actually worked. And so they signed up. and a guy we were working with, Adam, called them up, and they actually they needed a solution to share video privately. They do all their casting. Well, now I don't know what they were doing before actually, but they've been using us for many years to do all of their casting. So when anyone tries out for Cirque du Soleil, there's either they're in person and they're videotaping it, or they submit video, and that goes into Wistia, or now it's a system built on top of Wistia, and they send it to producers all over the world to review, to coordinate this giant global casting effort. And so they had just signed, they were one of the first people to sign up through this AdWords trial for the product, and started paying for it. They were I don't know, probably customer number 10 or something like that for us, which was kind of wild. And again, was kind of right place at the right time. And just that the market was very small, and there weren't a lot of products out there that were kind of doing what we were doing at that time, I suppose. But that was kind of the first step towards a more frictionless sale.
Interesting. So how have you guys kind of competed with a Vimeo or a YouTube with, having to maintain this infrastructure for video and serving video, which can be very server intensive?
Yeah, I think we started at the right time. And even YouTube and Vimeo as well. When I was right before I quit my job and we were thinking about doing this video thing, that was the first thing that crossed my mind. It's oh my God, it's going to be so expensive. We're not going to be able to stream this video. It's going to be too expensive. And so then I started calling around to various content delivery networks to get pricing on, transfer rates and stuff like that. And I remember calling, I don't know if calling companies out and saying what their old pricing is. I'm sure it's fine, but called up Akamai, which is kind of the gold standard, right, for content delivery networks, yeah. and certainly was at the time. And they're how much bandwidth are you going to do? I'm I really have no idea. What's for the lowest volume? What are we talking? And they're $5 a gigabyte. And I was $5 a gigabyte? Oh my gosh. And of course, when you're going to start this, we're planning for great success. We're what's this going to look like when we have 100 million viewers on here? And it's this is a staggering amount of money. This is not going to work at all. And somehow we just through, ignorance, basically, being completely ignorant about all of this stuff, we're whatever, we'll figure this out. So when we launched that portfolio site for artists, there was another CDN that was getting started in New York called Panther Express, which was started by one of the guys from DoubleClick. And we were talking to a sales rep there, and he was getting all psyched up about what we were doing. And I think he thought we were a little coy about it, but we were just trying to get a good rate. And I think he thought we were going to do a lot more bandwidth than he did, or maybe he just wanted to sign up some more people. Mm-hmm. But he gave us a rate of 49 cents a gig or something. So that was a tenth of what we had been quoted before. All right, this is awesome. And he was yeah, all right, guys, we're psyched to see this thing launch next week. It's going to be awesome. And we really had no idea how much bandwidth we were going to do. We had run some math, so we knew we weren't going to be completely screwed if it was successful, but we really had no idea. And so our bandwidth bill comes for the first month after operating this portfolio website, and it was 26 cents or something like that. And I was I emailed him, I'm hey, where should we send you?
You want to check?
He's oh my God. He's I can't believe you guys just when it accrues to more than $20, we'll call you. So, if you're not doing high volume, it's pretty cheap. And so the reason I say we were lucky is because there was all of this kind of pay as you use it type of the Amazon Web Services stuff. We used S3 and these CDNs. It was not a minimum monthly commit that we were able to get. And so it was really cheap for us to get started. So it wasn't we had to throw down thousands of dollars a month just to, do no traffic and then be out a bunch of money. It just kind of scaled with us as we grew. Yeah. And especially getting started with the private video sharing. That was, there's no case where you have a viral video, right? Going to cost us tons and tons of money.
Right.
So it was always the case that stuff didn't didn't really, I don't know. It is expensive, but like per unit, it's not bad, especially if it's for a business use case and people are paying for it.
Right. And you're covering your costs, obviously, through your pricing model.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I would love to, you guys have some, very well recognized companies on your homepage, MailChimp, SEO Moz. I'd love if you could share kind of how those relationships came about. Did they come to you? Had you met them and you kind of pitched your service to them? How did that come about, and how did you grow the trust that allowed them to, use your service on their homepage?
The Moz one, I can't really remember. Chris can speak better to that one, but the MailChimp one, I think, is an interesting story. And like, we were always, since we had heard of MailChimp, which was like pretty early on in starting Wistia, we were huge fans of what they did and like followed them very closely. And I think I can't remember the order in which these things happened, but the short story is it was built over a very long time before they even used our product or probably even knew what we did. We like built an integration with them, like completely without their kind of like help, just using their public APIs, and sent it over to them, and they thought it was interesting. I mean, it's still like really small potatoes, right, for them, like based on our scale and their scale. But it's always flattering when somebody does something like that. And
what was the integration?
What was the integration?
Yeah.
The integration it's actually the same thing that we have today, which is super useful, is that in our product, you can get an embed code for MailChimp, which is basically like an image with certain email merge tags, such that when you send it out to your list and people click through, it'll put their email address in the URL, and then our video player will detect that and pass it through to our backend, so you can see like on the individual heat maps who those people are and what they watched.
Oh, cool.
And it's really powerful because if you were watching a bunch of stuff on Wistia.com and eventually later signed up and like clicked through on one of our emails, you'd be tagged, and then I could see all your kind of historical viewing data as well to kind of tie in like, oh, this is what, videos he watched that caused him maybe to sign up.
Okay. And so did they send it out to their list, or what did MailChimp do with it?
The first version of it, I don't think so.
Okay.
And there's like been a second version of the integration after we kind of knew them better. But so we did that. There was another time, basically we were like frantically trying to get their attention for like probably the better part of a year, 2 years. I think they were hit like 1 million customer or kind of like users or something at some point, some big milestone. And we made a video that was just like, that we were really excited for them with like all of us in it, and sent it around, and we had like stats on it so we could see that like a bunch of people there watched it.
Okay.
And that was cool. And it was just like, just because we liked them and it was like friendly stuff, it wasn't even, at this point we were like kind of wise enough to know that like, this is not how a sale is made, that we don't just gonna, call up and give them the pitch and they're suddenly gonna buy. And then at some point, I think we just got an email from Josh, who was doing their video stuff over there, and said, hey, I'm looking, I can't remember, I think they were using like Blip TV maybe. And he's like, I'm looking around at other solutions. I'd love to check you guys out. And so I talked to him on the phone kind of about what they were looking for and what they needed. And they ended up actually going with Brightcove, which is I suppose a competitor to ours. We don't run into them a ton because they're a little bit like upmarket from us.
Okay.
But they definitely like looked a lot more mature, especially at the time. And like, MailChimp does a lot of like, we looked very kind of like a small business thing. I think they were concerned that like we wouldn't be able to like handle the volume, despite I'm like, no, it's fine. We can do it. Yeah. And there were a lot of features that the product didn't have that I was like, look, like, you have no idea. We love you so much. Like, I will personally build these features for you if you want. Like, I don't know. It was a little too desperate, probably. But like, we continued to talk after that, and it was really friendly. And then I think they had signed up for a year contract. And near the end of that, I got another email from Josh, and he's like, hey, like, this is coming to a close. We want to like talk to you guys again. And we ended up flying down to Atlanta and hanging out with them for a few days. And that was awesome, and like got to know them a lot better. And we had come a long way that year. And after that, they had signed up, and we've been down and visited them many since. And Ben has given us a lot of great advice, just because the business model is so similar, and they're very far in front of us around the stuff. So we look up to them a lot, and it's very cool to actually be working with them and have them be like a customer.
Wow, that's really cool. That's a much different story than I was anticipating. So that's really refreshing to hear. Yeah. So it sounds like it was almost like a 2-year sale, but not even really a sale.
Yeah, it wasn't really a sale. I think, and most of the most successful partnerships we have are definitely not like a kind of salesy business thing. It's just because the products make sense together, and the people, like, we get along with other people and like see eye to eye on stuff. And the most successful partnerships we have, there's like no money that trades hands either.
Interesting. And so what might one of those look like?
I mean, I think the MailChimp and the Moz ones are a great example. Like, we promote them because we use their product and we like their product. And we talk about it to our customers, and I know that drives business for them, and it, like, vice versa. Kind of, it's almost something that we found, at least for what we do, is, yeah, and it's easy to imagine that it works this way, that, MailChimp or Moz are companies that other people look up to, like we look up to them. Mm-hmm. And if you see that they're using something like Wistia for their video hosting, then that builds trust, and you're like, oh, okay, like if they're using that, that must be pretty good. And that also sends us customers. So it's not even a partnership per se, Okay. But then it's just kind of like two friendly companies working together.
It's like networking as an entire business, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's there's a lot of personal relationships between people here and people at those companies. And it just like goes, I don't know, runs very deeply. It's not just like a kind of piece of paper about like, send us this many customers and you get money back or something. I don't know.
That's cool. That's really refreshing. Yeah. What has been the biggest driver for you guys of new signups? Has it been like the learning center, the blog? What kind of like mechanic have you guys been able to create that has driven signups?
Well, I think the one thing that we know for sure is that there is no silver bullet for this stuff. And despite having searched for it for 7 years and to continue to search for it, it's always the stuff. Word of mouth is still our biggest driver of growth, which is an amazing place to be. But at the same time, it's not something like you can spend more money and just increase word of mouth, right? Yep. It's really like what we have found works is just kind of like incrementally improving things that we have and building stuff that we know our core audience will like. And so the way that we think about this stuff is that, word of mouth is a big driver for us. We have an audience that really cares about what we do. And the more that we can do right by them and create content that's interesting for them, it causes them to talk to more people about Wistia and kind of like bring in more people into our audience. And so it's really been like a very incremental kind of growth for us over the years. And something about that is really like comforting to me, I suppose, maybe from having tried to do like really early on, kind of go out like, oh yeah, we're going to do this and it's just going to suddenly explode. It feels like very much like within your control, right? Like, oh, if you can just do this and it will reach maybe, 1 or 5% more people, like that doesn't sound like as hard as like, all right, everything is riding on this one piece of content that we've been working on for a year, right? I mean, that's terrifying.
Yeah. That usually doesn't get released, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking back to what you said. You've been at this for 7 years. You've gone through a lot of iterations of the product. You've grown quite a bit at, what you said is a pretty comfortable pace. Looking back over these 7 years, are there things you would have done differently or more quickly, or maybe had less resistance to, or what would you do? What would you do differently looking back, if anything?
It's a very good question. I'm very good at rationalizing past failures. So that's a tricky one. I think one thing that I still struggle with a lot is, I don't know, I guess like trusting your instincts on stuff. And especially starting out, like we knew we had absolutely no experience doing almost any of this stuff. And so we were constantly second guessing things that we did, or just that if someone presented something to us that didn't feel quite right, we were like, oh, well, we don't really know anything about business. This is probably how things are just done in this world. And that's almost never the case that is actually true. Like, I think things, like when you're doing something right, it's like clear kind of from all angles. Like, there's nothing magical about business or building a startup. It's just kind of like slow, methodical work. And when things are right, they all make sense, like no matter which way you look at it, or at least that's the way I think about it. And I feel like we've gotten ourselves into trouble kind of at various times, or just maybe like spun our wheels a lot when we were like, thought something was like, we're like, oh, this could be it. This is like the magic thing. And we just didn't really understand it, but it was just alluring that like maybe there was something we didn't understand that could be really good that we should be, I don't know, going after, I suppose. And I mean, that's really abstract, but I guess we've been lucky that like we haven't made any giant mistakes along the way. But certainly like we were bootstrapped, and when we made that shift, after we got a few customers early on, we decided to raise a round of angel funding. We had met these two other guys who were a lot more experienced than us, and they really got what we were doing, and we wanted to work with them, but they needed to be paid salaries. And so we kind of like thought about this a lot and decided to raise some money. And one of the guys, Adam, was like a really experienced sales guy. And even before he left the job he was at, he had sold a Wistia account to Nestle Nutrition. So we're like, oh my God, like this guy's amazing. And he was amazing. But we were like, because we had like a few of these like sales in a row, we were like, this is going to be like, what are we doing? This is like the easiest business in the world. Like we're going to raise this money. We're going to be profitable in 4 months. Like just, we were like extrapolating like, off of these like tiny data points. And clearly this just like, if anyone else was looking at this, they'd be like, this is just us. This is not the case. Like, this doesn't make any sense. But, through talking to investors and doing this, like we got all like hyped up on this thing and basically kind of set ourselves up for this like huge roller coaster of emotion. So we raised this money, and then in maybe, I want to say like April of 2008, and then we did not sell a single thing for the entire summer. And we were like, oh my God, we have failed. We had something, we were like, ramen profitable, and we were bumping along, and we were like, we got too greedy. What did we do? We have failed. We can't sell anything. It was just horrible. It was horrible.
It's terrifying.
Did you keep them on?
Yes. I mean, they were great. Yeah. And Adam just left recently, but Ben is still here. So yeah, we've worked together for 6 or 7 years now. It wasn't anything to do with those guys. It was just like we had some early successes, and we didn't understand why, and we like thought that we were like somehow like onto this like magical thing.
So one other thing that we've noticed is that with a lot of the SaaS companies we talked to, they're established now, but in the early days, it took a year, 2 years longer to get any amount of like sizable revenue. And during that time, they were doing either consulting or working on full-time jobs. What did you've talked about how you were going after a totally different market and running a lot leaner back then, but how long did it really take you guys to get comfortable for you and Chris?
So we were trying to, we lived in, I actually still live in the same house. It's like a 6-person house in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the rent is very cheap. I mean, I don't know if these very specific numbers would be interesting to share, but I think I was paying $700 a month for the room I was in, half of which was our office. And Chris was living downstairs. and it was a bunch of friends of ours. So we were all splitting food costs, but since they weren't there for breakfast and lunch, that was very helpful for us. And so we were living on like the extremely small amount of money, and we had signed up the medical device company. I think they were paying $400 a month, and maybe we had someone else paying $200 a month, and sign up somebody else. So we kind of got to like around $1,000 a month, I think, at that point. And then we were more or less like covering, from that point, we could kind of like survive. Maybe we were like, $1,500 a month. And we're like, all right, we can survive like this forever. We've done it. When we raised that money, that was terrifying because I think our burn was around $40,000, like with all the servers and salaries and stuff. And we were paying ourselves. Then we were paying ourselves, I want to say like, Chris and I were paying ourselves $80,000. And we were like, this is really stupid, especially after we had sold nothing. So he like lowered our salaries to $30,000 a piece. And we're like, all right, we can survive like this comfortably in our house here. And we put this chart on the wall where we'd write down every sale that we got. There weren't a lot of things to be written down on this chart at this time. And I put a line that was like for $40,000 and then a line with our recurring revenue at the bottom. And like anytime we'd make a sale, we'd like, put like, it would be a timeline going along, and we'd like bump it up and like see how far we had to go to get to profitability. And it was like a crippling, like, I don't know if it was a good idea to make that graph. At first I was like, oh, this is great and motivational. And then we'd like get a sale and it would be like, so the first thing we sold after that summer of sorrow was Adam sold something to this machine and tool company in Canada, this guy who worked there, but it wasn't for that. It was for his son's hockey team. And he sold it for $12 a month. And we were like, what are you doing? Like, we can't, like, we had just sold something for like $10,000 for this like enterprise contract. And now you sold something for $12 a month. This is insane. And like registering that little blip on the wall of $12 a month to try to get to $40,000 a month, obviously doesn't make a huge difference. So sorry, this is a rambling answer to this question. That took, I don't know, another probably 2 or 2.5 years to kind of get back there. So that was really terrifying in terms of like, it feels really good to get to the point where you're self-sustaining, obviously, of course. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I think the lesson to be learned is charge more.
Yes.
And how did you guys justify? I know the cost of video is very high, but when you were selling it in the early days, how did you justify hundreds or thousands for this?
Well, we never really, I'm trying to think like what the most that we really ever kind of sold it for in the early days. I mean, those were probably our highest prices, like some of the early people who were paying a few $100s a month, because it wasn't really like usage based at that point. It was more just like for the value of this product, I suppose. And I mean, one good thing about going the route where you don't have your pricing online to start is that I think, especially this day and age, it's really, people will see your pricing, and like if they don't really understand the value of it, it's easy for someone to say like, oh my God, this is so expensive. And when you don't have that much like data to react to, it's really easy to like talk yourself. I think the point you're making is like, it's really easy to talk yourself out of a higher price, because you can look at so much competition and people who are at scale, and you can see that they're charging such little amounts for this, and you yourself are a small company and you're like, I would never pay this much money for something. And that's like a really dangerous kind of like line of thought, like when you're trying to survive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because we're charging $9 to $49 a month, and we know it's way too low. But we don't really have anything to back up the higher prices currently, even though we know that, it's worth that. It can actually save you money or make you money. But it's hard to make that pitch and to know how high to go early on. But good. I think the best convincer of that is to write it down on paper and see how many you'd have to sell at $9 compared to $99.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's a lot easier to lower your prices than raise your prices. Although I guess I would say it's actually easier to as long as you grandfather people in, it's easier to go both directions. But yeah, certainly. I mean, and you can imagine, I mean, if you're just trying to get to profitability, right? You look at those numbers and you're like, yeah, I can sell 100 of these things. Like that's like a number I can wrap my mind around. Like 10,000 is like an impossible like cliff to climb. And I think, yeah, the hard thing is like the rejection, I guess, that you get if you have a price that's higher and you're told many times like this is too expensive. Either you have to kind of go after different people who are willing to pay that, or you've made a mistake in pricing it. But I think it's really easy, especially because often like starting a company, your peer group are people who are also kind of in companies similarly sized, to get feedback of like, this is too expensive, where that might not really be true. And like, it's crazy to try to think back into like how we thought about pricing when we were a lot smaller to now where, you know, we're not like rolling in money, but like certainly like we're doing pretty well. And like being like $100 a month for almost anything is very cheap to us. It's more about like the time, like how much time will this take to invest in and think about, and like, will it save us time versus like the exact dollar amount of something. Right. And I think that's how like kind of like a medium to larger company, or even some small companies, like think about that. But I remember being much smaller and like, I did not think that way. It was like, oh my God, this is $10 a month. Like that's a lot.
We had people tell us that we were full on idiots for trying to charge $14 for our last product.
Yeah. I guess it's, everyone has a different kind of value attached to what a dollar means to them and time. Like, and it's hard. Pricing is very, very difficult. We continue to change our prices. We've probably changed our pricing over 100 times without exaggeration, and continue to.
Wow. It's an ever evolving process.
Oh, it never ends. But one thing we have learned is, at least, you know, maybe it's different for something like Apple, where people are like on the website refreshing to see if there's new pricing and different products, but almost no one really notices when you change your pricing. Like, as long as you don't change people who are paying, right? Like that they would get that deal, or if you lowered it, that you would, allow them to switch to the cheaper pricing. But we have changed our pricing so many times without anybody noticing at all. Especially when we were a lot earlier, there were times where the pricing on the website was different than the pricing in the application, because we were just trying to do it quickly. I mean, it's like not exactly the most professional thing to do, but we were like, all right, we just want to try this out. And we'd have it different on the website. And a few people were like, hey, the pricing's different. We just gave them the lower of the two prices. But for the most part, nobody even notices that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're really the only one on your site every day, probably refreshing it.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
To see, because we've changed our price 3 times. We've had different pricing models, and not once has anyone come back and said, hey, you're ripping me off.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure if they did, you guys would, it's an easy problem. You're like, I'm sorry. Like, anyone can understand that. You're a business, you're trying out other prices. Like, okay, yeah, it's a normal thing to do.
Yeah. You would just give them the lower price. No big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. This has been great to hear about your kind of journey to where you guys are today. Where can we keep up with you and with the developments of Wistia?
We have a pretty active blog on Wistia, where our antics are chronicled. And I suppose the only social network that I'm remotely active on would be on Twitter. So I'm Brendan on Twitter. My claim to fame.
It's a pretty good name, yeah.
Got in there early. Yeah, I had no idea what it was. It was right when we were starting, and I was like, oh, it's this Twitter thing. What's this, group text messaging? And like signed up with my name, and it turned out to be something meaningful. So
very cool. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Rocketship podcast. If you haven't yet, pop open iTunes and subscribe to be notified of future episodes. We have some really great ones lined up.
And while you're there, leave us a review. We really appreciate each and every one of them.
Lady no master. She go say, lady no master. She go say, I'm a lady.
Undiscovered, equal when you undercovers, we would discuss injustice. Century you suffer from auction blocks to record covers, beauty and canvas gauge painted by the other. Jane Doe, bitch, whole baby mother, niggas that need rose, afro color. Want us to back it up, gyrate and yell, freedom tellers, have patience, sister waiting on us 40 acres. Mule of the world abused by folklore. Black bodies, eroticized supply stores. Lady to lady, I understand for sure. Minds ignored, but wombs free to explore.
She gon' say she's equal to man. She gon' say she got power like man. She gon' say anything man to herself she can do. She gon' say she got power like man.
Lay it down, spread them out. We write your story as you can, a mind close your mouth. Play the background, your backside, cash cow. Turn around, guess you more than your ass now. Wait a minute, we've been holding this shit down. Backbone of the world since before sound. Black girl, Lord see when a woman found. Leaving on the next Greyhound across town. Sister cop the window seat, Badu style. While the wound bleeds the wounds of the deep south. Can't wash it out, shit is real, conjure rebel. Put us on our knees, make us fiend to clean down. Keep it real, you afraid when we speak loud. When we scream, you seen a ghost in the haunted house. Simmer down, it's the black, you can't bleach out. And the story we gon' breathe in and breathe out. Ladies.
Hey guys, welcome to The Collective. I'm Brianne Helfrich, a 26-year-old bioethics PhD student and clothing brand CEO. Welcome to my podcast where we talk all things health and wellness, navigating your 20s, and becoming the best version of yourself. So, sit down, play that episode, and join The Collective.
Hey, this is Mary Beth Lassiter. Are you craving a new podcast? I've got a recommendation. Check out Gravy, the James Beard award-winning podcast that shares stories of the changing American South, brought to you through the foods we eat. It's produced by the Southern Foodways Alliance and distributed by APT Podcast Studios. Listen to Gravy on your porch during happy hour to hear about the mystery of the missing Pappy Van Winkle bourbon. Don't miss out. Follow Gravy wherever you get your podcasts.